Hello and welcome to this episode of the Devotional Anarchy podcast, where I'll be talking about repairing relationships through radical self-ownership. I love me some alliteration. And this is a really vulnerable episode for me because I'll be sharing some of my personal experiences and observations around self-ownership in the context of relationship rupture and repair. And the truth is that I've experienced a shit ton of relationship ruptures this year. So I wanted to come on here with some just my own truth and my own sharing of what self-ownership is, what it looks like, more importantly, what it feels like, what are the critical elements of radical self-ownership, right? So that we're all on the same page, so that we really understand what the fuck we're talking about, right? And I feel like I want to talk about repair, especially because it's so important. It's like the part of relationships that we sort of underemphasize, that we don't talk about as much, but where there is so much richness and where we need the most help, frankly, right? Because it's like when we're activated, when we're having a conflict, that we really need the most guidance because our nervous systems are just like flared up, our intimacy wounds are activated, right? All of this stuff is happening, and we're not able to sort of make the way to the executive functioning part of our brain to be able to like actually do the important repair work and come back into deeper intimacy, right? So we miss the opportunity for deeper intimacy when we aren't able to take that walk from sort of a more reptilian limbic brain place to the executive functioning that we're capable of. Yeah, and relationships are messy, right? Conflicts are going to happen. And like I said, there's opportunity for intimacy in those conflicts. Like, I don't ever want you to think that, I'm conflict free or anybody should be conflict free. Like, conflicts will happen. You will make mistakes. Like, look forward to them because it's an opportunity for you to deepen the intimacy. And there's more opportunity for intimacy when there's self-ownership and truth, right? Those are part of the conditions, like, critical conditions, I would say. So I have to just say before I start that my body is hating doing this episode right now, because of how vulnerable it feels, and because Hurricane Fiona is moving through Puerto Rico right now. I am feeling the collective pain of colonialism, of land being ravaged, of people being desolate, even though I know we're fucking resilient as fuck. And I'll do a future episode on like collective consciousness, embodied collective consciousness with my mentor. But I need to integrate some of this pain first. But I did make myself some broth, some vegetable broth from my community garden, which feels like a connection to land. And so I'm nourishing myself, nourishing the part of me that needs comfort in that particular way. So, and there's also a part of me that is loving doing this episode because I really get to take my time sharing with you in detail. Each episode is for me like a class, I don't like to call them master classes, but I don't know what else to fucking call them right now. But it really is sort of like where I can do like a brain dump of what I know, instead of doing it live on social media and just you getting like little sound bites in between all this other flurry of information that's being thrown at you. So first, let me define self-ownership as I conceptualize it. So it is taking full responsibility for your thoughts, your emotions, your behavior. This includes feelings, sensations, experiences, reactions, as well as stuff related to your history, to your childhood wounding, all of that stuff, right? Even like the collective stuff, like you're responsible for that, right? In your body, in your experience. But self-ownership also includes joy and pleasure and happiness. Like, you are responsible for your pleasure and happiness. and your turn on and your joy and your limitlessness, right? That is on you. And so this is where self-ownership sort of it dovetails, it's sort of hand in hand with sovereignty, right? And self-ownership, when we come into relationships, and I include here work relationships, partnerships, connections with clients, this is where we have the power to sort of reduce blame. Blame externalizes responsibility, right? When we blame someone, we're telling them, you're responsible for me feeling the way that I do. And so self-ownership says, I'm responsible for the way that I feel. And this is how, this is what's happening in my body. And let's share these experiences and see where we land. It also reduces victimhood, right? Because blame and victimhood are sort of go hand in hand, right? When we blame somebody, we're sort of in our victimhood. We're in a collapsed authority, right? Your sense of agency is not activated. So you're like you're in a victimhood position, even though you may not be a victim, or even though you may have been victimized. In that moment, you are making a decision to sort of go on the victimhood track and say I am you're the one to blame. I don't have control over this, right? So your sense of authority and agency is not activated. So self-ownership is really a place of activated agency. It focuses on what you're in control of, which is how you respond to situations. We don't have control over a whole lot of things, right? But we do have control over decisions that we make with our energy. So the hardest part of self-ownership is containing, relating to your inner experiences to be able to talk about them, right? So you have to be able to hold, this is what I mean by containment. We need sort of a bucket to be able to put all of our experiences in it. And that bucket, the size of that bucket is the size of your nervous system capacity, right? This is why embodiment is important, right? Because when we may have intellectual knowledge about our shit, our baggage, our stuff, but if we don't have the system, right, the body system to hold it, the capacity to hold it, it's just, we will flood, we will overflow, we will overwhelm, right? We will do all those things. We will burst. You can't pour a pitcher of water into a thimble. It doesn't work. So the other hard part about self-ownership is being willing. This is where willingness comes in, will center behind the heart. Be willing to look at how you are contributing to a dynamic. And it can be a tiny part, right? But it requires humility. It requires self-forgiveness, gentleness, right? Which is, part of mindset, right? Deciding that we're going to be gentle with ourselves, deciding that we're deserving, being congruent with the belief that we are deserving. Sort of this what I call heart aligned embodiment, right? And we're just going to be gentle with ourselves. We're just going to be nice, right? Let's give ourselves some fucking grace. We're human. Because oftentimes what we do is we make ourselves wrong, we shame, and I'm going to get into shame later again, because it's a huge piece. So now I'm going to share some of the experiences I had this year around rupture and repair, including an integral piece, the critical element or a critical element that's often missing when people want to take responsibility or accountability for something they've done or said. So one of the experiences I'm going to share with you is one rupture where there was no repair, and it actually resulted in cutoff. Spoiler alert. And the other one was this beautiful healing experience, like an ending of a relationship or an ending of an aspect of a relationship that was actually a beautiful healing experience because of self-ownership. Okay, so I'm not going to use names or gender just to protect the identity of these lovely people. So one of the people is someone I was seeing for a few months, and over the time we were getting to know each other, like things developed pretty quickly. There was something about our connection that felt really like exciting because they were really open, and I like to be open, but people normally aren't. And so I'm just like, woo, somebody who's open, yay, right? So we got to know each other pretty quickly, and sort of we entered into like a very deep connection very quickly. And over time, as we were getting to know each other, I was feeling more and more overwhelmed by this person's way of being in the world. I felt sort of a energetic mismatch over time. Initially, that was a strong match, felt like a strong match. And over time, I was feeling less and less of it. I also felt, because of the energetic mismatch, I felt my attraction waning. But I also really liked them. I also really, really liked who they were as a person in a lot of ways. I was sorting out sort of aspects of my romantic feelings, my sexual identity, my gender identity in relationship to this person. So, and I didn't bring this internal process to them because I didn't want anybody else's input into something that felt so private to me, that felt so like connected to my identity. Like that's not something that I necessarily want to process with somebody as it's happening. And I did process tiny pieces of it with them, but not the really deep stuff that felt very much like it needed hermiting around. So when we were finally in person, because we, it was long distance and we would see each other, twice a month. So when I was finally in person with them again, I shared with them my feelings about, my attraction waning and my desire to transition the relationship into a friendship. And this person felt betrayed for good reason, because I had not been fully honest with them about what was happening for me internally as I was relating to them. But more importantly, and this is where I want to take self-ownership, my explanation for why I was not radically honest with them was devoid of emotion. There wasn't really like it wasn't an apology, because I wasn't sorry. And I felt like they wanted an apology. I don't know if an apology would have helped, but what I was sort of anchored into was this understanding and deeper knowing of that's what I needed to do. I felt like I needed to be internal with this. I would have liked, like, my values are being radically honest, but I didn't, my behavior did not align with my values. And so I was uncomfortable with the fact that my behavior didn't align with my values. So I felt kind of like, right? But I wasn't willing to feel the in that moment. So instead, I was defensive in that way. And I was not, and because I was in my protection of the part of me that felt like, ooh, incongruence, yucky, possible shame alert, ding, ding, ding. I wasn't really attuning to their pain of betrayal. Even though I like was watching it as it was happening, I knew that was what was happening, but I wasn't willing to feel the shame, and I wasn't willing to feel the feelings. Again, I'm not sure an apology would have helped. I'm not sure any of this would have helped because they were so activated. And I also noticed, because they were activated around their wound of being betrayed, being lied to, which I totally get because I fucking hate that shit too. So they were in activation around that. And I noticed my nervous system going into a freeze response. And my freeze response isn't like a typical freeze. It doesn't look like typical freeze. It looks like I get very quiet internally. Like I feel like my energy gets, those little matryoshka dolls where there's like all these dolls with nesting dolls. I become the tiniest doll, and I'm still my big old self, but my energy is very, very tiny. I get very calm and quiet. My energy gets pulled down. My voice goes down like this. very slow because I want to calm the other person down. And that is my appeasement mode, right? I get energetically lower than the other person so that I don't present as a threat, so that I'm not activating I'm not activating them any more than I already am. So in that dynamic that we were happening, you know, what I like to call in Spanish, un arroz con culo, like a rice with ass. It was like a shitty situation. It was clear that we were not going to be able to dip down into the level of vulnerability required to do repair work, right? Because, and I'll share this a little bit later again, but like, you know, the repair process involves 3 steps. It involves, right, there's the defensive mode. This is where we usually stay, and this is where I stayed in this dynamic. Then there's the vulnerability where we sort of like cop to our shit, right? Self-ownership. And then we move into connection, right? Then we can soften, we feel safe, and then we can soften into the connection and, right, like express our desires and our needs more. So we were both in defensive mode, and the basic safety and trust wasn't there in order to be able to move into that vulnerability and ultimately into that connection mode. So what I decided to do then was just let them decide what they wanted to do to keep themselves safe, because they didn't feel safe. I knew that I was going to be okay. So I said, okay, I'll sacrifice my feeling of safety right now because I can create that for myself pretty easily. And so eventually, you know, they left the situation in that moment, didn't come back, and also didn't decide to come into repair, and they decided to cut off contact with me altogether. And that didn't feel good. That felt pretty shitty. And I think that, you know, looking back now, it's been some time, and would I would prefer to have a friendship, as you know, it wouldn't be a very deep friendship given sort of the insights I have now of our dynamic and what I believe they're capable of in terms of their nervous system capacity and their ability to hold their intimacy wounds with responsibility. But they're a good person to know, right? They're an awesome person. So yeah, I don't like cut off, right? It makes me feel really uncomfortable. So I had to be with that discomfort for a while. So let me take a drink from my delicious broth. So the second person I had a rupture with that felt actually like a healing experience was, I had a reparative experience with them. And this was someone who has been a friend of mine for a very long time. We'd gone to school together. We knew each other at a very deep level. There was a lot of affinity. We had acknowledged our attraction to one another a long time ago, but had totally like never acted on it because the time and conditions were never right. But many years later, the time eventually became right, and it was awesome during the short time it lasted. And it only lasted a short time because they realized pretty quickly that they weren't able to balance their work life with their marriage life, plus me, plus themselves. It was just like, it ended up, you know, not being the right moment, I guess, right? But the way this person had this conversation with me is the important part of what I want to share with you. So this person invited me into a conversation and provided all of their backstory. Like they put every fucking thing on the table. They shared what they were struggling with emotionally, what the complications were, in what direction they needed to go in order to feel like they were showing up for the things and the people they needed to show up for. They were vulnerable. There was no defensiveness. There was no justification, none. They were vulnerable. They were truthful. I could feel them. I could feel their frustration and their sadness at having to share this with me, at this not being able to work out in the way that they wanted to. I felt wanted in being able to feel that. So I knew, like, I didn't experience it as a rejection of me. Not that I would have believed that story anyway, right? Because yeah, it's not something I would hold on to, a story I would hold on to, but there was zero blame. It wasn't about me at all. I could feel their love for me, right? So I was really anchored in that. And they didn't even have to tell me that they needed to end our sexual partnership. They didn't even need to say that. It was so clear from the evidence that they were presenting and the emotional material that this was the necessary step. This was a necessary action to take, because I also wanted them to be well, because I could feel my love for them, and I was like, yes, go do you. Take care of yourself. I want you to show up. I want you to be the person you want to be in your life. I don't want to get in the way of that. And at some point they said, after laying it all on the table, they said, I feel like I'm talking so much. Is there any way I can support you? And I paused for a moment in that and was like, how do I want to be? Like, do I have needs? And I checked in with myself, like, do I have needs? And what I said was true for me was that, like, my need for honesty, for radical honesty, had been met, right? I was having a healing experience through this ending of this aspect of our relationship because of the radical honesty and self-ownership. There was no defensiveness. My nervous system was totally fucking chill. I was receiving the information. I was like digesting it as we were having this conversation. Mind you, I fucking hated it. I didn't like it. I didn't like that this was ending. I could feel a part of me that was like, no, right? I felt sad about it. I was like, fuck, right? I could feel the part of me that was like, ugh. And then of course, later after this, after this conversation was over and I felt my grief about it, I felt disappointed, not so much in the person, but like disappointed with like, fuck Venus, like, what is the deal? Or, hey, universe, like, come on now, throw me a bone. But eventually I came to a place of acceptance of like, okay, this is the right thing. And I don't like it, but here we are. And I'm just like really anchoring in. I had an experience, I had a healing experience. And that's what I focus on, right? Any relationship, I want it to be a healing relationship, and it can fucking last 2 weeks or it can last a couple of years. But what have you gained from it, right? That this is where the relationship anarchist in me is like totally like 2 thumbs up. Yes, I got some fucking healing experience from that. Like that felt fucking good. So in conclusion, when we enter repair conversations, whether they're with a lover or a partner or a client or even with your fucking kid, right? Like, let's not pretend that shit doesn't come up with our children either. If we're somehow defending our point, our perspective, and not embracing, not owning the moments we made missteps, where we stepped out of our values alignment, when our behavior was out of alignment with our values, perhaps because of shame and guilt, right? The usual suspects, we lose the opportunity to have a truly reparative process because, right, when we're defending a point, obviously we're in defensive mode and we're not willing to shift, right? Radical self-ownership shifts us out of defensiveness and into the vulnerability that is necessary to have to come back into connection, okay? And our defensiveness is so often, I can't give you a percentage here. I have anecdotal evidence that it's 100% of the time rooted in shame and guilt, right? We feel bad because either we did something bad or we are a terrible person, right? Whether it's having a conversation about, the way your whiteness came into something, right? Like I have a whole bunch of whiteness that I notice all the time and I'm like, fuck, man, that was a Karen moment. Ugh, right? I don't feel good about it. Or with my child, like, yep, that was a total power over dynamic I was using, little one. You're so right. We feel shame and guilt, and that's why we protect, right? We push back and we say, no, but it's you, and I did it because you did this, right? We justify it. And something that I want to say about shame, my work, embodiment work, is so much about de-shaming. I've only recently realized that this de-shaming is what the fuck I do with people. But what I want to say about shame is not a feeling. It is an experience in the body for certain, right? But what I want to say, it's not a feeling, it's not inherent to you. like inherently feel shame. It's societally constructed. It is taught to us so that we can function in society, so that we're not like fucking wild, crazy, right? This is how it's justified. The use of it is justified in our society. Well, we need to learn, we don't do this in this family, or we don't do this in our culture, right? That's how it's transmitted. And it doesn't have to be like super harmful, but we do learn shame. We learn, I'm wrong if I do that, right? So shame is not a feeling, it's societally constructed, but we hold it. We hold it in our bodies, even when it's not ours. It's never been ours. And then we do everything to avoid feeling it, right? And so in that way, it just kind of sticks around, and it's like having all of this effect in our lives. It's having all of this, it's playing out in all of these different ways, right? So, and we hurt each other. We hurt each other in order not to feel it, not to feel badly about ourselves. When you can allow yourself to feel the sensation of like, oh, I feel like a horrible person, but with the mindset of, I know this, I know that I'm not a horrible person. Like I can hold myself in my quote unquote goodness, right? In my divinity, right? Then we can allow that to sort of unravel. We can sort of let that unwind out of our body, because we know it's not true. We're not hooking into the belief that, yeah, I'm a fucking bad person, right? So moving towards radical self-ownership, and I say moving towards because it's like it's not a finished process. It involves de-shaming, and right, it's the path is a de-shaming path. It's a reclamation process of the self, embracing all aspects of your humanity. And when I say all aspects, I mean like your identity, including your, your core self, what people call the source self, or quote unquote the higher self, although I don't like the hierarchy. Definitely the shadow self, which has like, that's sort of our most protected and tender parts. Your primal animal self, like the part of like the tiger in you, or the tigress, right? That could like fucking kill somebody. The child self, like that, your innocence, your playfulness, the part of you that wants to remain a victim. Like, yeah, I want to sit here and just blame the fuck out of everything, right? Being able to claim that in a conversation is so powerful, right? To be able to claim the part of you is like, yeah, I don't want to give up my power right now, or I want to blame you because it feels so much better than having to feel this, right? Is like, what would it be like to hear that in a conversation, right? So the point is, radical self-ownership is being in aligned relationship, in right relationship, in loving relationship, in compassionate relationship with each of those parts of yourself, right? With all of the multiplicity of who you are, right? It could be queerness related, it could be culturally related, it could be, related to ego identity, right? It doesn't matter. It's all part of you. So that's it for today. I hope this was helpful. I'd love to hear your feedback. If you want to send me an email, if you want to send me a message over DM, I welcome you to do so. Definitely share with someone if you feel called to. Love you all, and I'll see you on the next episode.